Hi, welcome to the Beer Temple. This is Chris Quinn. I am in the new space for the first time ever, so it's a special episode for a couple reasons. One, that we're in the new digs, but more importantly, because I have a special guest who is Mike from Zebulon Artisan Ales in Weaverville, South Carolina, is it? North Carolina. I'm sorry. Thanks so much for coming on. Can you tell people a little bit about Zebulon and maybe some of the beers you brought here today?
Yeah, sure. Zebulon is in Weaverville, which is just about 10 minutes north of Asheville, so it's pretty much considered just North Asheville.
Yeah.
It's in an old firehouse. We've been open about a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
Congratulations. Thanks. We're specialized mostly in Belgian farmhouse style beers, a lot of barrel aging, a lot of Brett, a lot of cool ship sourced sour stuff going on.
Nice.
But we also are one of the few breweries that are focused on vintage beers or historical reproductions of beers. So we'll often have on cask, a 1917 porter or a 1923 IPA. Things have just gotten so, I don't say gimmicky, but really kind of gimmicky in the beer world.
Like throwing stuff at the wall kind of feels like sometimes.
Yeah, to me, if you have a candy bar imperial stout, with caramel and chocolate and coffee and all that in it, everybody's doing that kind of stuff where I just turn around and go backwards. And so for me, if I do a Russian imperial stout, it'll be an 1876 authentic Russian imperial stout.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah, and just try to, for me, tasting how things used to be is as exciting and new as what people are doing new nowadays.
I totally agree, and I also think it's a great way to see why we are where we are. It's very fascinating to see why a beer style ended up the way it was. It's often very political as well as geographically situated. So what goes into then, how do you decide what I'll pick a year, 1925 porter tastes like? How do you get that information, and then how do you go about replicating it as best you can?
Well, I rely on the work of beer historians who have put a lot of effort into this. Guys like Ron Pattinson, Martin Cornell, and
those are the two big ones.
The two gods of historical brewing. And these guys spend their vacations in dusty basements of libraries and breweries, photographing old brewers' logs, translating from hogsheads to pounds, and so you really can have the actual recipe from the brewer's logs from these breweries from 100, 150 years ago. And, the argument can be made that, well, the malt was a little different back then. We're not sure what the hops were like. But talking with Ron, he's, people be like, well, how do you know what the alpha acid on the hops were in late 1800s? He just pulls it out. He's like, I've got a hop analysis from 1907 that shows Goldings with an alpha acid of 5.7. And just like, wow, he's
not a bad Ron Pattinson impersonation either. That's pretty cool. So you just go off of, which I'm sure is awesome that these guys actually get to see some of their research come to life. I'm sure they don't want it to just be like theoretical or just discovery.
Right.
It's great that someone actually gives a damn and then goes and says, well, let's taste it now and see what it's like.
Yeah, for Asheville Beer Week this year, we actually turned our brewery into a time machine and turned it into a London pub circa 1910 and did an entire lineup of the beers you would have found in a London pub from 100 years ago. So Burton Ales, Milds, Porter Stout, IPA, Pale Ale. And Ron was just so happy, that he has put all this work into documenting these beers. But for him, his dream has always been to be able to walk into a pub from 100 years ago and drink the beers.
Yeah.
And for me to be able to do that just was a kind of way of paying him back for all of his work that he did.
That's really cool.
And like you were saying, it's fun for people to taste IPA from 100 years ago, taste what porter was like 100 years ago, and see how it's evolved. And in general, they're simpler beers. You know, like an IPA is just pale malt and Goldings hops.
Yeah, sure.
But the simplicity of them is sometimes magical, you know?
Exactly. I mean, I've said that a lot of times about some of the classic Saisons. You know, it's, 100% Pilsner malt often, and then just...
It's all in the fermentation.
Yeah, and then fermentation, and they're magical.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So can you tell me a little bit about this 4-pack? And I think you worked a little bit with Ron Pattinson on this, right?
Yeah, this was a collaboration with Ron, and it was a year in the works. And so we wanted to do 4 very different historical beers. And so the box set is called Relics, Lost and Forgotten Beer Styles. And they're very different. We have a Kotbusser, which a few breweries have made, but they've made it wrong.
Okay.
As far as the brewer's log show. It's a relative of Berliner Weiss.
Okay.
It's from the town of Kotbusser in Germany.
Yep.
And the difference between it and a regular Berliner Weiss is it used oats and local honey in it. So you got some more mouthfeel and a cool little honey character to it that really differentiates it from a typical Berliner Weiss. Did you want to open that up and try?
I'd love to, yeah.
Yeah, most breweries that I know have made a Kotbusser. For some reason, they're like 7% dark amber with a bunch of molasses in it, where I don't really know where they got that information from, but it's really supposed to be like a 3.5% sour wheat beer.
Okay.
But with some oats and honey in it.
Oh, I like your little branded corks there too. Do you how do you package? Is all your stuff in these?
Everything's in
Cork and
750 ml cork and cage, bottle condition. We just did these.
Not coming out of here, I'll tell you that. Well, not popping out, yeah.
We only did these 500 mils for this box set, just because 4 750 ml bottles I thought would be a little unwieldy.
Yeah, probably be a little pricey too. Well, cheers. There you are. And what's the name of this beer? Or is it just Kotbusser?
Yeah, at Zebulon we decided not to name our beers because we don't have any flagships, and I just couldn't be bothered to come up with 25, 30 cutesy names.
Talk about old school. Remember when it used to be like blank brewery pale ale, blank brewery porter. You are old school, huh?
Well, we decided to dedicate our beers rather than name them. So our beers might be, like Brett Farmhouse Ale for Gene Wilder.
I saw this for the Sex Pistols you had on there. I noticed that.
Yeah, we let Ron dedicate these beers, and he dedicated them to bands that he saw in London in 1976. Since it's going with the Relics theme.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the Sex Pistols, the Damned, the Ramones, and the Clash.
You definitely get the honey on the aroma, which is really nice. Almost like, definitely almost like a dry, sparkling mead in the aroma, and then you don't have any hint because there's no aroma to salt at the salt that's coming, unless you
no salt in a Kotbusser.
Oh no,
no, it's not a goza.
Well, then, is there coriander, or there's something that I'm getting that's very kind of briny, salinity, something like that in it? And in fact, I'm surprised that there's no salt. I mean, obviously, I believe you. You made the beer, but it then has this like briny character to it, at least as I'm getting it. Really refreshing, little kind of bright acidity. I don't know. What do you?
But
what do you
little
get from
softer mouthfeel than you're used to, rather than a sharp Berliner. And I think that's from the oats. And I think it's just the honey character. We used local honey from just a few blocks away.
Okay.
So that might just be the a spicy character of our honey.
That's great. Very refreshing for like a warm day or something like that.
Yeah, perfect pool beer.
And then the next beer.
Grodziskie, which is starting to be pulled out from the lost and forgotten category. There's a couple breweries doing Grodziskies. It's brewed with 100% oak smoked wheat malt.
Yep.
It's a Polish style. Depending, the town of Grodzisk was right on the border, so sometimes the border would change and the name of the town would change to Graz.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they're known as Grotzers, and sometimes they're known as Grodziskies. Kind of just depends who
you talk to?
just on the time period,
Okay.
you know.
Because you do see them marketed as the same. I think Grodziskie is kind of won out now, is what I tend to see more. But I don't know.
Yeah, again, it's a style of beer that I've seen done poorly. I think New Belgium and was it Three Floyds did a Grotzer a couple years ago, but it was a smoked porter.
Yeah,
you
it
know?
was very dark. Yeah.
And then that's not at all what it should be.
And what should it be in your eyes? Well, certainly not. It's not dark.
It was considered the champagne of Poland, so it should be very sparkling and dry. You know, again, a 3.5% alcohol beer. But it's got some nice Polish hops in it. But it's all about that campfire aroma, you know, where it's the oak smoked as opposed to the beechwood, which you get in most beers. So it's a very different smoke character.
It's not that like hammy, meaty. It's much more like campfire.
Yeah, and it's kind of a head scratcher for a lot of people because we're used to smoked porters, smoked stouts, the Schlenkerla smoked beers. But to get a very light, refreshing, hoppy, basically a session pilsner. With the smoke character, it messes with some people's heads. But I really enjoy it for just a summer beer. There's a lot going on.
It's nice
for a 3.5% alcohol beer.
It'd go great with like grilled foods. I think it would be great for again summer, easy drinking. I'd say if there's anything that it would remind me of that's somewhat commercially available, it would be the Schlenkerla Helles. I think where there's a light smoke on a also light malt. Really nice. I'm not, you know, sometimes those like meaty, bacony, hammy smoked beers are a bit much for me, but I have found myself really liking some of those. And this one, why don't you open this one? Because everyone's watched how weak my little weakling hands are.
One thing that nobody really understands about owning a brewery is the difficulty of matching everything together so that the corks fit the bottles and the labels and everything. Trying to get all that to come together is a lot more difficult sometimes than people think. And these are new bottles. We've never bottled 500 ml bottles before, so the corks that we were using can be a little
they're just like one half size too big.
Yeah, and if I went for the slightly smaller one, they'd come popping out on their own. So.
No, better to have them be too hard. You can always get a bottle opener if need be.
And now this is a very unusual beer. This is an Arctic ale. No, sorry, this is October beer.
This is the October beer, okay.
And October beer is an English style, not to be confused with Oktoberfest.
Okay.
This dates from the 1700s, back before there was really a lot of commercial brewing. That brewing was done mostly in landowners' estates. You know, if you owned some land, you almost always had a little brewery. In October, the new malt and hop crop would come out, and they would make their finest beer of the year. And all these brewers are trying to outdo each other. So they didn't have hydrometers back then, but the recipes calls for 50 pounds of malt for a 5-gallon batch. So you can imagine that these are just imperial barley wines, sort of. Boatloads of hops. This was calculated at 188 IBUs.
Oh my goodness! Not what I was expecting. This is of the four. This is the only one that I've never had before, because I assumed it was something about like before there were lagers and Oktoberfest beers, there was German October ales, but not at all.
So trying to get 188 IBUs with the Goldings, hop, which is 4%, it was just a total pain trying to get bags and bags of hops. And then they barrel aged it, and of course you're going to get Brettanomyces in there. That didn't, Brettanomyces translates as British yeast.
Yeah.
And that was the house character of English beers for hundreds of years. It only disappeared, in late 1800s when Pasteur came along. So this is barrel aged for 8 months with Brett. And then we dry hopped it with more Goldings before we bottled it. So it's for a BJCP judge, this would be very difficult to pigeonhole.
Yeah.
It's so strong that's like an English barley wine, but it's super hoppy, which it normally wouldn't be. and then the funk and the oak.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on with it.
The hop character and the oak, it really almost gives this wonderful floral, almost like vinous quality, because you have this like fruitiness coming up from it, and the oak as well.
Yeah, if it was sour, it would
nice.
start.
Yeah, I haven't tasted it yet, but like smelling it, I wouldn't be surprised if it was sour, because usually that's where you get some of that kind of fruity oaky thing. But
yeah, I think the 188 IBUs would keep the lacto in check for the most part. But so this is 12.1 ABV, and the Brett dries it out, so it's not doesn't have a lot of residual sugar. Plus the hops, although it's calculated 188 IBUs.
Sure.
It probably was more like 100, and over a year now the hops have faded a little bit, but still firmly dry.
Very dry, still has a nice kind of grip to it at the end. It's certainly, though, sweet, but like a toasted barley wine style sweetness to it. Very interesting beer. I think this is definitely an after dinner beer for me, or something that I would want some like fatty foods or something to go with.
Yeah, it's not a poolside slammer for sure.
Very
and
interesting.
The idea is that this might be the predecessor of IPA, in that they this was the beer they would have been sending to India when they first started sending beer to India, because it was the best beer and they knew it would make the trip. But you can imagine people in India getting this and be like, dude, killing me.
Yeah.
So they started dropping the ABV down while keeping the hops really high, and eventually that would have became what we know of as IPA.
Fascinating. And it's called October Ale.
October beer.
October beer. Okay.
Yeah, back in the 1700s, ale and beer were very different things. Beer was highly hopped. Ale had very little hops at all. So.
Awesome. I think we're on to our last.
Yeah, this one is Arctic Ale.
Yeah.
This is brewed for Arctic expeditions in the 1800s.
I had one of these a long time ago. I think a brewery in Pennsylvania called Fegley's or something did an Arctic Ale. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the history of Arctic ales.
They were brewed really strong so they wouldn't freeze. These ships would be just frozen in the ice over a winter up in the Arctic Circle, and just a nice strong beer would help them through.
Thank you.
About 12% alcohol.
Okay.
You can kind of think of it as a dark barley wine, maybe.
Beautiful beer.
There's no roast character in it, though. It's just caramelized sugar and pale malt.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely like what I would think of aromatically as like an old ale or a darker barley wine, something like that.
It almost reminds me of like a Belgian quad, but not fermented with Belgian ale yeast. If you just did a quad and fermented it with an English strain.
Yeah, big and a little chewy, and a lot of that almost like rum cake, fruit cake, really nice kind of toasted quality to it.
Yeah, I could see that getting you through a winter in a frozen ship.
Yeah, right.
Ron had an interesting opportunity to drink like a 146-year-old Arctic ale.
Yeah.
And so
I read about
it's
that.
pretty hard to compare a beer that's 6 months old to one that's 146 years old.
Right.
But it's fun to brew a beer that potentially could be aged for decades. Now in this age where the shelf life is in days or weeks.
Yeah.
To have something that could really be aged for 10, 20 years. Some of our friends are having babies now, and we're giving them bottles to like bury in the backyard and dig up when the kid turns 21.
That's awesome.
Just to see,
That's funny. I did the same thing for both my kids. I bought cases of barley wine and marked them for their 21st birthday and the year and everything, and just kind of put them aside. And we'll see if they hold up for 21 years. It's a little bit more.
Are you trying to keep them refrigerated, or?
We're keeping them at, for now, cellar temp, but I'm gonna probably just throw them in refrigeration forever. Yeah, just keep them like that, and then that way they can have some and kind of remember it by. To me, it's not really to make the beer taste better than it does now in 20 years. But
yeah, it's gonna get unique oxidized character that you just have to appreciate that or not. But
yeah, no, I'm not. If I did, I would have picked a different spirit or alcoholic beverage if I really was hoping for it to get better. But I figured
just bury a 5-gallon barrel of scotch.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be great.
So these are not, these were, it was a fun take, project to do these 4 beers, but our brewery isn't really that focused on historical
so if someone
beers.
visits, don't expect to have a lineup of every historic beer,
No, we'll have 1 or 2 usually on cask, but really we're more of a funky sour brewery. The thing I really like focusing on is using modern hops and playing them with Brett.
Okay.
I think that works just so nice to pair Galaxy and Citra and these up with a nice funk, and they work so well together that that's something I'm really excited about.
Well, awesome. And the name of the town was
Weaverville.
Weaverville.
Yeah, it's just a few minutes north of Asheville.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks so much for bringing your what were these forgotten beer?
Yeah,
what's the name of the
Relics, Lost and Forgotten Beer Styles.
Awesome.
And,
thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. And thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you can reach out to us on pretty much all the social medias and stuff like that. But until next time, we've got some great Relic beers to drink, and hopefully you do too. And if not, now you know where to get some. Cheers.